Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the ISO Quality Services Supplier webinar. We've got a few people still joining at the moment. We are due to start in a few moments. We'll just let everybody join. Thank you very much for joining us. Perhaps you could just pop in the chat where you're joining us from. It'd be good to know where you're joining us from in the country today, and perhaps what the weather's like. We've got a glorious sunny day here today in Worcestershire. Or chilly but sunny in Tamworth by the looks of it. Had to defrost my car for the first time today. Chilly but sunny in Birmingham as well. Yeah, I think winter's definitely on the way. Sunny and bright in Feckenham, lovely. We'll just give it a few more moments for people to join, probably start at about 2 or 3 minutes past 10. Cold in Sheffield, oh, I'm sure. Bright and sunny in Gloucestershire, lovely. Not far away from us. Still lots of people joining, which is great. I think we've got a good numbers joining us today. Richard in sunny Wakefield. Thanks for joining us this morning. Just give it a few more moments. We've just got a few more people joining us, just to allow for people to have time to join, get connections. Okay, I think we've probably got most of the people we're going to have joining this morning. So I think we will make a start. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning for the ISO Quality Services Supplier webinar. I'm going to be your host for the morning. I'm Stacey Humm, and I'm a business development specialist at ISO Quality Services. Before we go too much further, can I just check that everybody can hear? Please do let me know in the chat if there's anything wrong with sound, and we can try and sort that out. Perhaps you could just give me a thumbs up in the chat, or just let me know that you can all hear okay. So yeah, I'm Stacey Humm, and I'm a business development specialist here at ISO Quality Services, and I'm going to be your host for this morning. The presentation is actually going to be given by my colleague Julia. Julia is a very experienced business auditor and works with us here at ISO Quality Services, helping our clients implement and audit their ISO standards. Julia, could you just forward the slides on a little bit? Julia's got control of the slides today. Apologies for the slight delay there. Thank you, Julia. So there's my photo, and there's Julia. You can see Julia's going to be presenting this morning. I look a little bit different from my photo, and you will see a bit later on. There's a slightly different photo cropped up as well, because I'm on our managing director's computer. So if I turn my video off later and you see a lovely blonde lady, that's not me. That's our managing director. So just to avoid any confusion there. That's myself and Julia. Can we have the next slide, please, Julia? Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. I think everybody's microphones are muted anyway, but if you could just make sure your microphone's muted, just avoids any feedback. If you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A function or in the chat. I can see both. I think probably because we've got a fairly tight schedule today, so we'll probably deal with questions at the end. So please don't think that I'm ignoring questions if you pop it in and we haven't answered it straight away. We will come to questions at the end, but again, please feel free to pop it in the chat or the Q&A function. And even if it's not a question, if it's just a comment or anything on the presentation or anything you want to point out, then as I said, please pop it in the chat and we'll come back to it at the end. I think that's it for housekeeping. So just a little bit about who we are. I won't go into too much detail, but we're family-run business. We are specialists in helping SMEs improve their businesses through the implementation of ISO management standards. And we also offer training services. Like many of you joining us today, we're a small family-run business. We've got Peter and Susan Appleton, who set up the company 20 years ago. We've got Jennifer, our managing director, who now has the day-to-day running of the business, and Debbie, who's our HR and facilities director. And we're members of the Chamber of Commerce, and we're proud members of a local networking group, Circle to Success. So that's a little bit about us. And we're very much focused, as a lot of SMEs are these days, on our missions and our values, and we do strive to inspire organisational improvement and efficiency with our customers, and we try to get them to put ISO at the heart of what they do. And we're very much focused on our customer promise, on our values, and we've set them out there. And we've worked very hard to figure out what our values are as a business, and hopefully that kind of passes through everything that we do as a business. Next slide, please, Julia. Thank you. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my video and I'm going to hand over to Julia to deliver the presentation. But as I said, if there are any questions, please do pop them in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll hand over to Julia now for the presentation. So I hope you enjoy. Thank you very much. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you, Stacey. Okay, so the whole kind of session today, I guess, is built around something that as a business we've learned over many years, that supply chain relationships and the focus on those relationships we think are critical to business success. So that picks up our second aim of today, and we're going to have a look at why they're critical to success. The first aim, in terms of what excellence in supply chain management looks like, the whole session is really geared around giving you, we hope, some practical hints and tips around how you can improve your supply chain management. We're going to also look at how to create value within the supply chain, and we're going to ask you really to kind of reflect as we go through the session today, and hopefully beyond today, to think about whether some of the things that we look at today together you may be already doing, which is excellent. Some of the things maybe you don't do, you haven't considered, and we would ask you to think about what you might be able to do differently. And then the fourth aim, how to make the relationship work for you, your suppliers and your customers. For me, this is key really, because that whole idea of having a relationship where there's trust and there's integrity can really make the difference in terms of business success in our experience. So you can see that actually 2 of the 4 outcomes are around relationships. So as you can appreciate, managing the supply chain and supplier relationship is a very broad topic area, and we chose today to focus in mainly on that area around managing the relationships, because in our experience that's where it can make a real difference. We're also, if it's okay with you, going to do something at the end of the session to kind of challenge you to do something with the ideas you've taken from today. And we're kind of looking to call you to action, I suppose you could say. So towards the presentation, I'll talk to you a little bit more about a suggestion for something that you could do to put in practice perhaps some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So I thought it might be useful to look at a definition of supply chain management. There are actually lots of definitions out there, but I thought these kind of picked up on the main, for me, the main themes around supply chain and managing that whole kind of infrastructure. So our definition, so that we're all starting from the same point, I guess, is that supply chain management is the management of the flow of goods and services provided by individuals or organisations external to your business. Now that of course is key, because your suppliers are external to your business. That's going to impact on the extent over which you can have control about how they deliver their products or their services to you. But the key thing is that those individuals or organisations which are external to your business contribute massively to the delivery of your product or service to your customer. So you can begin already to see why understanding and working with supply chain members to improve that whole relationship and the whole structure of the supply chain becomes very important, because here is the link to our customer. And at its very best, supply chain management involves the active streamlining of a business's supply side activities to maximise customer value and gain a competitive advantage. So in that kind of second bullet point, it begins to suggest to us that actually managing our suppliers is an active activity. It's something that is not passive, and it's not something that we ignore. It is something that is a really critical part of delivering to our customers. So I guess for me, the two key points there are the fact that these suppliers are external to us, but we have to have those relationships in place to make sure that they will deliver on our behalf for our customers. And giving you this competitive advantage in the marketplace is really key too. And we'll talk a little bit more later about how you can actually try to maximise that within how you work with and manage your suppliers. So that's a definition as a kind of starting point to see where we are. We thought we'd have just perhaps a bit of fun, it's a bit light-hearted, to get a view really from the room. So what we've put together is just a quick and simple Zoom poll to look at some key statements. So in a moment, I'm going to ask Stacey to run the poll, and you'll have an opportunity to vote on whether you agree or disagree with these three statements. So statement 1, do you agree or disagree? Statement 2, do you agree or disagree? And statement 3, agree or disagree? And that just gives us a bit of a view from the room. So please, could you run the poll, Stacey?
Yeah, absolutely. Right, I shall just start the poll now. We'll have just a quick 1 minute to answer. So I shall launch the poll now. So just 1 minute to answer. Oh, very quick. I think most people have answered there. Pretty conclusive results, Julia. I'll leave you to discuss them, but I think that's everybody who's answered there. Let's have a look. Yeah, just 20 seconds left if anybody wants to change their answer. But yeah, pretty conclusive. Just a few more minutes. Sorry, seconds, not minutes. Okay, so I shall end the poll there.
Can I ask you to talk us through the poll results, please, Stacey?
Absolutely. So the first question, the best way to deal with suppliers is to squeeze them on price. 100% disagree there, Julia.
Brilliant.
Suppliers do their thing and we do ours. So we've got 9% agree there, so one person agrees with that. And disagree, we've got 10 participants disagree with that. So suppliers do their thing, we do ours.
Thank you.
And the third question, suppliers are critical to us meeting our customer needs. 100% agree with that, Julia.
Great stuff. Thank you, Stacey.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, guys, thank you for voting in that poll. I guess there's a poll of somewhat more significance going on across the seas at the moment over in America. So we thought we'd have a poll in here today just as a bit of a fun, really, and to get your view. And they're fairly conclusive in terms of most people are agreeing one way or the other. And certainly squeezing suppliers on price in the past has certainly been something that some businesses have worked towards that kind of aim. And what I would say in my experience is that it's one way to do it, but it's maybe not sustainable. And clearly the view from the room was kind of supporting that. Now, the second one is really interesting because suppliers clearly are external to our business. And they do their thing, whatever that is, and we do ours. However, we can't do our thing properly, stay in that particular, if our suppliers don't do what they need to do for us in the most efficient and the most effective way. And it's interesting, I'll come back to this point number 2 when we look at some of the things that the ISO standards say about excellence and quality in supplier management. And really delighted to see that everyone agreed that suppliers are critical to us meeting our customer needs. And as we said in the introduction, really, that's one of the reasons why it's so important to get this stuff right. So thank you for that poll, guys. Now, one of our aims for today is to look at what excellence in supply chain management actually looks like. What does that involve? So it makes sense for me that one of the things to look at is the ISO 9001 standard and the requirements that it lays out in terms of managing the supply chain. So many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with ISO 9001, which for me is a kind of the fundamental quality standard. It looks at most of the things that occur within our business, including how we work with our suppliers. So in terms of positioning suppliers within the ISO 9001 standard, in 2015, when the last review was conducted, suppliers, I think it's fair to say, became more prominent in terms of the coverage within the standard around suppliers and supply chain. So that's quite interesting because you may well know that when the ISO standards are reviewed and they're revised, that whole process involves lots of businesses globally to look at what might be missing from our standard that would take it to the next level. So this is the overall definition in terms of the requirements of the standard in relation to suppliers. So the organisation shall ensure that externally provided processes, products and services conform to requirements. Again, that's carrying on with this theme that this is an active thing to do. It's a proactive thing to do because in order to make sure that those product services conform to our requirements, clearly we've got to be clear on what our requirements are. And the organisation shall determine the controls to be applied to externally provided processes, products and services. So again, this is about us actively managing all of the elements of the activity that involves our supply chain. So more detail from the ISO 9001 standard and the requirements. The organisation shall determine and apply criteria for the evaluation, selection, monitoring of performance and re-evaluation of external providers. Let's just pause there for a second and think about this idea of applying criteria. One of the ways to look at this, I think, that might be quite helpful is to think about a recruitment process. I don't think there are very many businesses out there who would recruit to a position in the business without being clear on what we're looking for. So we'll determine the criteria and we'll go through our recruitment process, and the person that gains that job, the person that we decide to take on, will be the one that matches best our criteria. So if you liken it to recruitment of staff, then applying criteria is something that we're kind of used to. And the ISO 9001 standard requires you to have some clear criteria for the evaluation of your suppliers. And as an auditor, one of the questions that I ask of our customers is, what are your criteria? Where have you documented them? How do you actually apply them in practice within the selection process? So this whole idea that we start off being clear on what we're looking for in our suppliers. And we also use that criteria to manage and performance manage their performance in terms of how they work with us and how they deliver. And finally, the organisation shall retain documented information of these activities and then any necessary actions arising from the evaluations. So we begin by determining the criteria for the selection of our suppliers, and then we look at whether they're actually performing against that criteria. And when do we re-evaluate them? So again, as an auditor, one of the questions I often ask is, have you got any examples of when you've changed a supplier based on them not meeting your criteria in terms of what you're looking for? And sometimes I'm really delighted that business might say to me, well, actually, Julia, we were about to do that, but what we did was to work with that supplier to help them to understand better what we actually wanted from them, and we helped them to improve their performance. And actually, that relationship has continued and is much better than it's ever been. So I'm not suggesting, again, if we use the analogy of performance management, if we've got a member of the team that's not performing up to the level that we require them to, we wouldn't necessarily, in fact, we wouldn't at all immediately go to look to dismiss them. We would go through a process that might help them to improve. And how much you invest in that is completely up to you. But this whole idea that actually we're being clear on what we want from our suppliers, and maybe we might need to do something to help them to meet our requirements, or maybe they can't meet our requirements, so we look for a different supplier. So looking at a little bit more detail about the ISO 9001 requirements of suppliers, this is talking about you ensuring that your externally provided processes, products and services do not adversely affect the organisation's ability to consistently deliver your products and services to your customers. As I'm sure you're well aware, one of the things that's really key to quality in the business is consistency. So if we have a supplier who is not consistently delivering for you, then clearly it's going to impact on our service delivery to our customer. So this is making sure that your externally provided processes remain within the control of the quality management system. And this is a really interesting point for me because when we talk about ISO, we talk about a quality management system. So ISO 9001 for me is the core quality management system because it kind of covers everything that we do within a business, from who we're involved with, who our stakeholders are, what their needs are, how we deliver on those needs. It covers the leadership of our business. It covers how we improve things within our businesses, whether they're processes or relationships. So 9001 is kind of the fundamental quality standard for me. And what this is saying is that actually, although our suppliers are clearly external to our business, the processes that they provide, so the overlap with our business, really should remain within the control of your own quality management system. And when we think again about one of the kind of the key components of quality for suppliers, this idea of having some criteria that we apply, some of our customers have as one of their criteria for selection that their supplier has, for example, achieved ISO 9001. So if I'm a business and I believe that ISO 9001 has really improved my business and it gives me a framework, if you like, a structure within which we control our quality, then actually it kind of makes sense that if we want to work with the best suppliers that we can, maybe we set a criteria that's around our supplier having 9001. And again, coming back to working with your suppliers. Some businesses that I've worked with actually help and support their suppliers to achieve ISO 9001, or indeed any other quality certification that is relevant to your sector and that you feel would improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of your suppliers. So again, this idea that although they are external to our business, actually what they provide for us is very much part of our own business and how we deliver that. One of the things that I think we've made clear from the beginning, talking about the aims of today, is that our experience is that supply chain relationships are really critical to business success. And there are a number of reasons for this, and some of them are fairly obvious. And in the poll earlier, we saw that everyone agreed that the supplier is so important because they impact on delivery of our product or service to our customers. So again, if you think about this as a bit of a cycle, your customer relies on you and you rely on your supplier. And you can only deliver to your customer if your supplier delivers for you. And this, for me, it's a kind of a statement of the blinding obvious, I guess. But sometimes in the business of running the business and all the challenges that we face, sometimes the supplier relationships can sometimes take a bit of a back seat. And that's when they can start to get fragmented and maybe not work to the best effect. So having that focus on relationships, even when times are difficult. And the third point there, when times are tough, and for sure, I think we could put the situation we're in today into that category. When times are tough, having strong supply relationships can make all the difference. And I was looking at an interesting report that's come back from the Manufacturing Growth Programme. I haven't looked at it in detail yet, but certainly one of the headlines in that report is that through the recent pandemic and the first lockdown, problems within the supply chain and problems with individual suppliers seems to have come more to the fore. And so I think it's really important that we think about how we can do our best to invest in that relationship in order that we can get the best even through difficult and challenging times. And I'd like to give you a couple of examples of this idea about times being tough and the importance, I guess, of those strong supplier relationships. One is a business example with a customer that we work with at ISO Quality Services, and one is a personal example, but I think both of them highlight the difference it can make, particularly in a moment, to have some strong relationships. So the first example is a business that we work with and we run their audits for them. So they have 9001 and 14001. And this particular business, I've been working with them for about 3 years now. They're a great business. They've gone some really good growth periods. It's planned growth. They're very much focused on quality in every aspect of what they do. So that's kind of the background to this business. Around about a year ago, when I did their audit, they were telling me that they'd brought in a new production line because business had improved and they were planning it, and they brought in a new production line. And I remember them telling me that it took 5 months. So from the initial decision to do that to actually having things up and running, there was a 5-month window. And they were okay with that. They planned for it and it all worked very, very well. So they were delighted. If we fast forward to my most recent audit with them, which was kind of conducted remotely and about towards the end of the first lockdown, they told me that because of the nature of what they do, actually their business had grown, and it had grown very quickly because the product that they provide was more required in the lockdown situation. So there's greater demand for it. So they went back to their supplier and the people that they worked with because they now needed another new line in order to meet the production demands. And they told me that they'd actually completed that whole from start to end of the new line in 5 days. So something that just a year before had taken 5 months to achieve had now been achieved from start to end in 5 days. Now that for me is an incredible story. So obviously my question was, how did you do that? What happened in order for you to do that? And they gave 2 reasons. Firstly, they said it was a lot of hard work, and yeah, I can imagine that. But secondly, they said it was because of the relationships that they had with their suppliers. So because when times were good, they worked well with their suppliers, and because those relationships had been built and enhanced over time, when the going got tough, those suppliers really worked. They pulled out all the stops to work with them to achieve what the business needed in order to cope with demand. Because I guess really, the whole supply chain starts with a demand, doesn't it? It drives the kind of whole supply chain cycle. And so that was a really incredible example. So from 5 months to 5 days. The other example I'd give to illustrate this is a personal one. So just as we came out of lockdown, we were looking to have some building work done on the house. So as you would, we got 3 or 4 quotes from local builders and had discussions with them about the timescales that would be involved. And 2 or 3 of them said, actually, it might take us longer because we're really struggling to get some of the supplies that we'll need in order to complete the build for you. My most local builder is just up the road from me. And I had this discussion with him and I said, what's your timescale? And he said, well, actually, it's going to be around about 6 weeks, 6 or 7 weeks. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, I understand that there have been some problems with suppliers and getting all the materials that you would need. So is that going to build in any delay? The other builders had told me that, yes, it would. And he said, no, he said, there won't be any delay from our perspective. And I said, that's quite interesting. I said, because others have told me that there would be delays. So why do you think there won't be? Part of me was thinking, I wonder if he's been really open with me. And I remember exactly what he said. He said, no, there won't be a problem. He said, because we've always treated them right. So I guess if you wanted to kind of, in a nutshell, think about that supply relationship and making it work for you, particularly when times are tough, treating them right is kind of a bit of a strapline that you could adopt. And this guy, he's a kind of dyed-in-the-wool builder, been involved in the business for a very, very long time. And that was his simple take on why there wouldn't be any delay in our project. And I have to say, to be fair to him, there were no delays at all. So a couple of examples there of the power, really, of working with your suppliers in order to get those relationships right. Okay, so one of the things that I've done a lot of work on in the last 20 years is around lean and is around looking at every aspect of lean. So lean, producing efficiencies, making sure that we're doing things as efficiently and as effectively as we can. So supply chain management features within lean, and we'll come back to that a little bit later as well. But this whole idea that the supply chain should be creating value kind of makes sense, and it's common sense. And supply chains, of course, have always been there. We've always needed others, mostly needed others, in order to deliver to our customer, whether that be logistics for deliveries, whether it be raw materials, etc. But actually, it's quite interesting that all the research shows that most companies have only recently started to pay attention to their suppliers as a value add component to their operations. So this whole idea that your supply chain, when it's managed effectively, can add some real value. So if we take an example within manufacturing, in particular car manufacturing, I'm sure you'll be familiar with the concept of just-in-time delivery. That improves the effectiveness because the parts that we need are there when we need them. We haven't got to store them, so we haven't got to keep inventory that we don't need for a period of time. And of course, there's a cost involved in that. And there's a storage issue involved in that. So there are lots of costs involved in it. So this idea of looking at where you can create value within the supply chain is a really interesting way of looking at it. And an interesting kind of almost a twist on that is a company that I worked with recently. And one of the things that they had problems with was the delivery of their product. to their customer. And so the delivery process, when it worked well, worked really well, but when it worked badly, it tended to go really badly. So this company decided to work with their delivery people, their logistical supplier, to look at how they could improve that. And one of the things that they decided to do was to set in place some performance measures in order to evaluate whether the changes had worked. Brilliant principle. We plan what we're going to do, we do it, we then check whether it's worked, and then we make sure that we continue on that whole process. So the plan, do, check, act, cycle of continuous improvement, a really good example of it. And one of the things that they decided to do was to collect some customer feedback around the delivery, so specifically the delivery, the on-time delivery, and they decided to co-brand that whole process of seeking customer feedback. So clearly the supplier is looking for good feedback on their delivery, because we've had some issues here that we hope we're going to iron out, and we hope it's going to improve. But let's collect some customer feedback from the end user, because clearly that's important not only to the supplier, but also to the company that are involved with that particular customer as their kind of end of line customer. So they co-branded some customer feedback, and that worked incredibly well in terms of going forward with the feedback and everyone being signed up and taking ownership of any improvements that had to come out of it. So again, working with your suppliers is a really, I guess, important aspect of taking a lean approach. So some of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the concept of lean. And one of the things that lean does is to define value add. So forgive me if this is grandma and sucking eggs territory, but the way that value is described within lean is business value add, BVA, customer value add, CVA, and non-value add, NVA. So thinking about value add, clearly we want to diminish, eliminate non-value add activities, which is interesting because the number of times that as an auditor or as a quality consultant I've asked, okay, so why do you do that? And the answer comes back, well, we've always done it. So in the midst of time, it might have been a value add activity, but a really great question to ask in the business is it still a value add activity? And identifying non-value add activities usually creates a tremendous opportunity to improve our efficiencies and our effectiveness, and ultimately to save time and therefore to save money. So thinking about non-value add, we want to diminish, eliminate that. But business value add, so for example, business value add, an example for me would be, having run a small business for over 20 years now, one of the things that I have to do is my VAT returns. Now, that doesn't necessarily add very much value to me because it takes up my time. I always leave it until almost the last minute to do it. And I always mean to get more organised next time, but I'm not sure that I do. But I have to do that because it's a business value add activity. It's a business value add because if I don't do it, then Her Majesty's Customs and Excise, Her Majesty's Revenue Collectors are not going to be very happy. So I have to do that as a business value add. A customer value add is something that we do within the business that adds value for our customers. So thinking about those definitions, it's not a question to answer now, but a question for reflection. To what extent do you think that your suppliers add value to your operation? And kind of the question that goes with that, I guess, is there anything that you could do differently that would help them to improve how they add value to your operation? So if I go back to the example of the jointly branded customer feedback survey, actually what happened after about the first 6 months was that the logistical company that was responsible for delivery actually ran that whole feedback, customer feedback, on behalf of the two businesses. So it was still jointly branded, but it was actually run by the delivery, the logistics company. So that would be a good example of something that is adding value to that relationship, and I guess signals that this is quite a good relationship. And sticking with lean just for a minute, in lean, when we think about suppliers, we consider the buyer and the supplier to be partners. So this is a collaboration. So if we go back to kind of the poll where we said, you know, is it right to squeeze our supply chain on price all the time? Is that what good relationships look like? Everyone agreed that it wasn't, which is a brilliant starting point. And what we're saying here is we're taking that on almost to a new level and suggesting that you think about the buyer and supplier as a partnership, because actually that will redefine how you look at it and how you think about it. I guess just before we move on from that, I've also worked with many businesses where we have tried to help that supplier to improve their efficiencies and improve their effectiveness. For example, by introducing them to things like lean training and lean methodology. So again, if there are ways that you can work with your supplier that helps them to deliver better on your behalf, that's really going to add some value for you. So please reflect on that question. One of the things that we're hoping that you'll do beyond today really is to reflect on some of the ideas that we're talking about. Some of this stuff will be known to you, I'm sure. Some of it might be different ways of looking at some things that you already do. Magic. This whole idea of magic. And we can, I think, bring some magic into our supply chain relationship. And I think we can bring some magic into it if we look at some of the key components of what makes this work best. So I'm afraid I'm not going to give you any fairy dust, and I haven't got a magic wand for you, but we are going to have a look at some things that can bring this magic into that whole relationship. So firstly, and this is kind of, I guess, also in summary of the ideas that we've talked you through today. So in summary, make the right choice. So if we go back to the ISO 9001 standard, we are looking at making sure that we've got some clear criterion for actually defining who are the right suppliers for us. What are we looking for in our suppliers? So making that right choice. And we use the analogy earlier of the recruitment process. Secondly, agree measures of success. So we've made the right choice, but how are we going to measure this success? Maybe we'll have an SLA, service level agreement, that looks at the performance that we need from our supplier. But whatever those measures are, make sure that they're in place. Because clearly, in order to measure against performance, we have to have those measures clearly defined. And actually, a really good tip, I think, is to involve your suppliers in agreeing what those measures of success are. Again, I choose the analogy of staff that, you know, if we're performance managing our staff, they can only really be sure that they're doing the right thing for us if we're very clear on what we want from them in terms of their performance. So give feedback on their performance. For sure, give feedback on performance against the service level agreements, and also give feedback on the relationship. Now, how is that working for you? What are the areas of the relationship that are working well? One of the things that I do quite a lot of is helping suppliers to work better with their customers and looking at what we can do to improve that whole experience. And always top of the list, interestingly, relationship comes out as number one. So whenever I talk to people, either as a supplier or as a customer, to get some sense of what's working and what could be improved and what's important, interestingly, that relationship comes out top. Which is why the I in magic is about investing in that relationship. So investing in that relationship might be about making sure that you are articulating clearly the things that need to be in place in order for all of this to work for you. And also investing time perhaps in helping your suppliers to improve. For example, one of the businesses that I work with, they've helped one of their suppliers to achieve ISO 9001 certification, because they felt that that would give them a common shared framework around which they could design and fit improvement. And the C in magic, consider perceptions and values fit. I'd just like to unpick that a little bit with you. Firstly, on the perceptions issue. So the very first time I ever worked within a supply chain scenario, I was working as a facilitator, so self-employed facilitator, talking to people about how they could improve things within their supply chain. And one of the things that was really interesting was that the different parties, so to speak, involved in that in those relationships often had moans and groans, shall we call them, about the other people involved in that. So, you know, we get it wrong because you don't give us enough detail to get the design right. We don't give you the right detail because you haven't made it clear to us what detail you need. But often these moans and groans would happen independently within that business. So they wouldn't share it with their suppliers. So in order to try to move on from that, in order to try to improve performance at every stage of that relationship, one of the things that I suggested was that we do a facilitated session where we got everybody in the same room and we work through some of the things that needed to be changed. And a couple of people were quite skeptical, I guess, about that. And I had comments like, crikey, Julia, that'll just turn into a bun fight and it won't work. So what I did was to design a process, a framework, if you like, within which we could do that together in one room at the same time, but it wouldn't end up in a bun fight. So one of the questions that I posed to these people was, what are the things that the other people involved in this supply chain do that really help you? So what are the things that work really well? What helps you? And another question was, what is it that they do that hinders you? Now, one of the things that came out of that was really interesting was that actually some of the things that I might do that I think will help you, when I get some feedback from you in that kind of facilitated environment, I find that it actually hinders you. So here I am. There are a couple of examples of that, things that we were doing because we thought it was a good thing to do and it would help. And actually, it was a hinder. It was getting in the way. And that's why I say consider perceptions, because those perceptions about what we're doing and whether they're working, our perception might be entirely different. So I would certainly ask you to consider getting together in a room with people, particularly where there are some issues that need to be ironed out, and having that really kind of adult to adult conversation around what we're doing that helps and what we're doing that hinders. And finally, the values fit. A company that's really striving towards excellence will look to see if they've got shared values, because if we've got shared values, actually, in terms of making the right choice, we're onto a good starter. We're onto a good platform for making all of this stuff work. So think about your values and the values of the people that you choose to be your suppliers. And finally, a call to action. So one of the things that ISO Quality Services are really passionate about is people doing things to apply any kind of ideas, any good practice that you might have picked up. And I'm hoping that during the course of this presentation, there have been things that have worked for you, things that you think, actually not thought about that, maybe we could consider it. So Stacey will talk to you shortly about what happens next, but one of the things that will happen next is that we will send you this self-assessment document. And it allows you to do a bit of a self-assessment about whether there's magic in your supply chain. So we've put all of those ingredients for magic on the left-hand side. So have we got our clear criterion for selection of suppliers? Are we clear on expectations, both yours and theirs? Do we develop the relationship? Have we got a good communication process? Or do we only talk to each other when there's a problem? Have we got success measures articulated? And have we got a review mechanism where we can monitor our performance against them? And finally, I think back to my local builder who said, actually, things have just always worked. And we've always just kind of been good to them. We've always worked with them, and we've always done what we need to do. So that relationship has been there from that kind of early stage, that we've always treated them right as a shorthand. So do you always treat them right? It's a give and take on both parts. So what we're suggesting you do is you do this bit of a self-assessment, And it starts with, do we have this magic? Yes or no? If we have, brilliant. If we haven't, then what do we need to do in order to take that forward? So we've decided that we wouldn't take up the whole hour with presentation, just in case you've got any questions for us. So I'm now going to hand you back to Stacey, and she will take you through the next stage.
Hi, Julia. Hi, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think that was some really sound advice there from Julia on the supply chain management. And I think from my own experience of business as well, it's, you know, it is about just treating your suppliers right, and really cultivating that relationship. I think just one thing I was going to point out is that I'd looked into the manufacturing growth program report that Julia mentioned, and I think one thing just to mention about that is that there was 59% of the businesses surveyed, said that they'd found the reliability of their suppliers had got worse. 65% of them were experiencing delays. 22% of them had also found a decline in quality as well, and 39% had found that their supply costs had gone up. And I think that particular report really highlighted that you know, there's a real importance there of having that resilience with your supply chain to kind of manage the things that are coming for us in terms of Brexit and the implications of COVID. So if anybody wants a copy of that report, we do have it, and we can forward that to you. So please do let us know if you'd like a copy of that report, because it's really useful reading and really ties in with the supply chain things that Julia's been talking about. I don't think we've got any specific questions, Julia, from anybody, but if anybody does think of any questions after the presentation or later, please do let us know. I've just put our contact details up there, and so as I said, please do let us know if you've got any questions following on from the presentation. As Julia said, we will send out the slides afterwards. We've got all your details, so I'll send out the slides afterwards. And if you think of anything and would like any further information on anything after that, please do let us know. Apart from that, I think, as Julia said, we will be finishing slightly earlier. Oh, hang on, does look like we might have a question. Sorry. Hang on a second. Oh, Julia, this is definitely one for you.
Okay.
We have a predicament with Google. We don't use Amazon because they don't pay tax properly in the UK, but Google are much harder for us to avoid. Any suggestions?
It is a difficult one because it takes us back to that values match, doesn't it, and the integrity of them. The problem is their reach, isn't it? Because I'm not sure you can avoid them because of their reach. And certainly, if I think about the example I gave you earlier of the company where they'd gone from a 5-month implementation to a 5 days, one of the things that they have as an issue in their business, even though they are very successful as suppliers, is that actually for one particular raw material, they can only go to one supplier. So I guess that's kind of a little bit of a parallel. And what they have done is that they have invested with that particular supplier to try to move them more towards working in a values-driven way as this company are. But of course, again, the problem with Google is I don't even know how you would begin to do that because it's just such a global reach. So I'm not sure I have got a suggestion, I'm afraid to say, and it's because of the size of them. And again, bringing it back to the businesses that are here today, I think most of you are relatively small businesses. As you grow, of course, then these issues do become more, I guess, more profound, because as you grow, you often need to take on more suppliers. You often need to spread the supply in order to kind of spread the risk. And so it gives you that kind of challenge to try to make sure that all of them are actually, singing from the same hymn sheet, if you like, as you guys are. So I don't know if I could crack that one. if any of us could crack that one, I think we might make some money. But the principles of it, I'm not even sure whether you could apply that. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty tricky question to answer, isn't it? It's a bit of a chicken and egg, as you said, Julia. When you're starting to grow, sometimes you don't have that power, do you? Yeah, Google and Amazon are pretty big to beat, really. Thank you, Julia. Thank you. There is another question there on a similar line, but we might have to deal with that one after, because I'm conscious that we do want to finish on time this morning. So there is that one question that somebody's typed, but I think we'll have to come back to that one because it's along the same lines.
Okay.
So I think we'll draw it a close there. As I said, we will be sending the slides out, and if you've got any further questions once you've received the slides, please do let us know. And again, thank you very much for participating, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, guys.